Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with Magnegrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit magnegrip.com.
Attention first responders, ready for a new challenge? You can turn your leadership skills into deliciousness by becoming a Firehouse Subs restaurant owner. First responders will receive a $100,000 cash incentive to help open their restaurant. Continue serving after service. Visit firehousesubsfranchising.com today. Fire Service Data and Tech Talk.
Hey everybody, it's Eddie Buchanan with the Fire Service Data and Tech Talk on fireengineering.com. We're back again this month with some interesting discussions on firefighting operations, training, and data, putting all those things together. Before we get started, I want to make the big reminder, FDIC registration opens October 7th, I believe it is. So you want to make sure that you're there early to get good spots. Those hot classes and workshops that are really popular, they fill up in a hot second. So get your stuff together now. Start talking to your chiefs that would approve any kind of training like that. Or if you're going to do it on your own dime, start working on the Airbnbs or whatever you have to do to make it to Indianapolis in April. But that's going to open up very soon. So make sure you have it set and be ready to go. And this month's topic for the podcast is actually a returning champion. We had this discussion. I looked back. This show aired back in September of last year. Where we sat down with the Phoenix Fire Department guys, particularly the training folks, to talk about some evolutions that they had done and how they had incorporated data collection and the tremendous lessons learned from that. And it's been a year. So we've got a whole new set of in-service training. We got a whole new report. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the in-service training works. We're going to talk a little bit about the data collection methods, which I think is kind of the punchline for the show is, how can fire departments that maybe don't have the resources that Phoenix Fire does, how can they replicate such an event at home? And how can you start to leverage data more in your firefighting operations? So that's where we're going today. And I want to welcome our guest. I got with us today, Division Chief Jason Miller. Jason, welcome back to the show. You were rocking the house last year, man. Welcome back. And,
yeah, it's exciting.
How you been?
It's been a whirlwind, a lot of fun. We've been, bogged down with a lot of this kind of stuff that's been super exciting. A lot of new things. Having some new team members there has been fantastic. And it's what I love the most about the environment that I'm in is there's so much. I would kind of consider it an innovation. I don't want to overspeak, but just the ability to rethink what we're doing, come up with new and creative ways to capture information that's immediately actionable to our troops in the field. And so it's been exciting. It's been a fun year.
Welcome back, man. Why don't you introduce us to your team here that you brought with us today from Phoenix Fire Department?
Absolutely. So we've got Maki Lloyd, who's a deputy chief for the Phoenix Fire Department. He was working with we have committees that work with labor and management to build out virtually everything we do. It's a really cool process. If you guys want to Google it, it's unique to the Phoenix Fire Department, but he was leading that charge to build out the training. So Maki actually built out the scope of the training, built out the 3-in-1 drill along with the classroom portion and a lot of the hands-on techniques with a ton of people from the department. So he was leading the charge with that. So he can speak to that overall drill and how it was set up, deployed, and the logistics of that. And then in our shop specifically at the Command Training Center, Aaron Kelley's a captain there who I've been working with for a number of months now. He's way smarter than I am, and he's savvy to the technical aspect of this. And so he picked up very quickly. I think last year Seth Jenners was here. We kind of picked up from what he had done, and Aaron was able to take this to a whole nother dimension. So he oversaw the technical aspect, the tools, the applications that we use, and actually the capturing of that. So he was project managing those folks on scene as we worked through this drill, and then did a tremendous amount of work on the back end to put the analysis together. And he's primarily responsible for the document that we're publishing. So Aaron did great work.
Awesome. Welcome, Aaron, and welcome, Maki.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You just got promoted, right, Maki?
I did. I got promoted in June, promoted from battalion chief to deputy chief. So I've been reassigned over to our EMS department.
Congrats, sir. That's awesome, man.
Thank you.
Like
Appreciate
I said,
it.
Congrats, condolences, whatever is appropriate given the day, right? So
right.
One of the big topics, I call it like, the master class that I took from the last conversation we had was about capturing data related to training. And then, to use your term, I think you called it closing the gap, right? So Jason, give us a little bit, just a real quick recap in case anybody hasn't heard that previous show. What do we mean when we say closing the gap? What's that about?
Yeah. And so when we analyze the data, one of the things that most people go to immediately is what I would consider proficiency. Simple linear time, looking at time frames. How long does it take to do something? But what we wanted to dive in last year, and we did again this year, is looking at consistency. And when you start looking at spreads, let's say you've got a particular event that you're measuring, and it takes some people a minute and other people 8 minutes to do the same evolution. There's quite a spread in there. Now, while you might have an average of 4.5 minutes on that, it doesn't tell you anything about the consistency with which we're doing this. And so your department might be all over the board with that. And so what we were able to do is measure what that spread was. It's a standard of deviance is what they call it in this analytics world. And the goal was not just to get better in proficiency and in times, let's say, or evolutions, but to narrow that spread, to bring that consistency together, because there's a very different, organizationally, it's very different for your folks to have all of your to have a 4.5 minute average on something with everybody being between 3 and 5 minutes than it is to have that same average and everybody's between 1 and 9 minutes. And so bringing that spread together and watching that, teaching to it, training to it, and then revisiting it, retesting it, and then reanalyzing it to watch that gap close allows us as organizations to say, is our training working? Are our folks getting more consistent in the delivery of this, not just more proficient in that? So hopefully I explained that well, but we were excited when we started diving into that.
Well, that's one of the things I get pretty excited about, the whole data beyond the air brake thing, right? That we're starting to understand operational context. Like how long does it take us to do things? And then how can we start to improve operations from the data we can collect? So you guys have been one of the first fire departments I've seen do that, particularly on the scale that you've done it. Really gives us a different perspective that we haven't had before. So, as we're looking ahead to things like NERIS and projects that are coming downrange in the next couple of years, this is definitely the time that particularly anybody related to training should be paying attention to this and starting to configure their training operations around this sort of thing. So, Maki, tell us, you put this shindig together, right, as far as the actual drill and operations and all that?
I did, yeah. So for those who don't know, we have, like Jason alluded to, a really good relationship with our labor counterparts. And everything that we do is we have committees with labor. And I was the co-chair of one of our RBO committees, which was engine company functions. And together with that committee and my co-chair from labor, we identified the need that we hadn't really done search and rescue training with the department in a long time, department-wide. It was mostly company level, battalion level. So we worked together, identified this training need, and then started working to put together this training package. And what we looked at is we used the UL studies from the search and rescue and single-family dwellings. We used the firefighter rescue survey. Phoenix has been participating in that survey really since its inception. So we looked at the amount of rescues that we'd had and compared it to the national data, looking at the likelihood of where victims were going to be found, bedrooms versus living areas, on the floor, behind doors, things like that. And we started this training in 3 prongs. We started with the classroom, PowerPoint lecture, just kind of going over all the data, talking about different things that we're looking at, what we wanted to accomplish, moved into a hands-on portion, talking about different search techniques, how we're moving through a structure, how we're moving lines, how we're grabbing victims, how we're removing them from the structure to reduce any toxic and thermal exposure. And then we set up the 3-in-1 drill department-wide, where we had our old money pit, we call it. It's basically a normal Phoenix-style house that we have on our old academy, a 3-bedroom, single-story house that we completely gutted, rebuilt the rooms and the layout, the foundation, the way we wanted it, and then set up 3 different scenarios that we would run each training block through as these crews came down. So we had 3 different scenarios. One scenario had 2 victims, one behind the door in the entryway, which were, according to the data from both UL, Firefighter Rescue Survey, and our own personal data that we collected, we're finding that many victims were within 6 feet of the door on the floor. We had victims in the bedroom. So the first scenario, we had the two victims, smoked everything up. We were able to isolate some of the rooms to make some clean rooms and see how our crews responded to those. We had a second scenario with multiple victims in one bedroom, and then we had a fourth scenario, again, with multiple victims and then different victims in the areas. And basically, we would run it like we would a normal house fire in Phoenix. We would have the first engine come on scene, assume command, make the assignments, and our crews would deploy their lines and go in and search. And then Jason and his team were watching, getting all the data points, timing, and the communication. So it was a pretty extensive operation, very well thought out on how we wanted the scenarios to play out, where we wanted the victims, and what types of things we were looking for.
And what, with the scope of the Phoenix Fire Department, when you run somebody through an in-service, run the department through an in-service, like what kind of numbers are we talking here? How many companies, how many people are involved?
Right. So, logistically, the training started with the classroom in September, and we finished it at the beginning of March the following year. For the drill itself, we ended up running 343 companies through it. We had a total of 24 drill days, and we were doing 9 scenarios a day in 3 separate training blocks. So I think out of our memberships, we were right at 1,100 of our members. We have about 1,800. So about almost 70% of our members went through the drill over that time period. And we said it was just logistically, it was a big lift, but we were able to get all our members through it.
That's one of the things I really appreciate when you guys do a drill like that, because you get such a volume of data that we can actually really get some good intel out of that. It's not just like if I ran my 17 companies through it, I would get a much smaller data set. You guys get you get a big old bucket of data. So that's really amazing. And 343 companies going through, that's not lost on me either. That number always jumps out. So
right, and that it was excellent because we had every member, every level. We had the battalion chiefs involved. Like I said, we ran it just like we would an incident, transferring command over to the battalion chiefs. We had our alarm room personnel involved. They would give the dispatch updated patient information. We had our MCTs on the trucks. Everything was set up to run just like a real call. They had an idea of what they were getting into with the conditions, but they really didn't know where the victims were going to be or what they were going to encounter. Awesome.
So what were I'm curious of the big takeaways. Now, if you want to get the report, we'll try to make that report available in the show notes. I've got it here in front of me looking through it. It's a very well done document. Aaron, did you do this? It's your work?
Yeah, I can't take credit for the whole thing. It was a group effort. It takes a long time to crunch through that amount of data, like you're saying. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I kind of went through and I got a hard copy here in front of me. I kind of went through and put the details of this thing together. These guys already had this drill built out when I came to work here at the CTC about a year ago, and they were already kind of headed down this path. And so I was just, how can I figure into this situation to make things better? And some of the things were just, figuring out how we were going to get some consistency out of this thing. We can measure all kinds of stuff, but if we measure it 10 different ways and 10 different drills, then it doesn't really give us a lot that we can look at. So Jason and I sat down, and some of the stuff you see in the beginning of the report, mapping out the house, where the victims are going to be placed at, kind of talking through some of that, and then figuring out how are we going to relay that to our guys who are running the drill so that those victims have to go in the same place every time. Otherwise, the data gets a little screwed up too. So some of those kind of things. And then from that, it just kind of seemed like anytime data came through, it seemed like it just kind of fell in my bucket. So, in the end, I ended up being the one to kind of push through this report, but I had a lot of help.
That's how it goes, man. Be careful if you're talented.
Yes.
Next thing you know.
I was
so. What do you
have them on this show? Because that's if people start realizing what they start poaching your guys when they start realizing how good they are.
That's how it goes. Yeah. So what were the big takeaways? Like, I'm curious to know what you learned specifically from this drill, and I'm also curious to know what was the same and different than the last drill, right?
Yeah.
What was reinforced from this one, and what was different? What do you think? Anybody who would have an opinion?
I'll jump on a couple.
Jason, go ahead.
I'll jump on a couple things, and you guys can fill in that jumped out to us. One of the things that was really interesting from the first, we did a drill previously that we talked about at the last show last year. And one of the things that came from that was huge in importance for us operationally was the amount of air consumption that our folks are using. We came to see in that report, there was, I think it's 255 pounds per minute our folks were consuming, which gives us a really good idea of work rest cycles, how much air you have in a bottle. We were looking at it relative in that instance to a commercial drill, which is very different tactics than it is in a residential structure. And so just gives our company officers and our chief officers a really good idea, a tangible number to what our work rest cycles are. Well, we duplicated that. In fact, in this scenario, we collected a lot more information relative to air. So we collected the air before the drill and after the drill for each scenario of every member that went into the building this time. Tons of data being collected on that. The thing that it did is it reinforced the numbers again. So we right around that 260 pounds per minute consumption number we found, which was great for us because it basically reinforced the numbers. It allowed us to know that that's a good number for us to go on. And we duplicated that with over 1,000 people that went through this drill. One of the things, though, that was really interesting, Eddie, was we found that the firefighters are consuming 30% more air than captains were on average. And I think if any of you would, I mean, if you think about it, that makes sense, right? Your firefighters are the ones doing the task level stuff. They're pulling hand lines, they're forcing entry, they got the tools. Captains can do some of that, but they're on the radio. They're making assignments. They're using tick cameras. They're directing people. And so I think we could in our minds imagine that, yeah, it makes sense that the captains are breathing less air, but this puts a number to it. And I think that's really important for us because as captains are tasked with managing the accountability and the air of their crews on scenes, knowing that their folks are breathing 30% less is a really solid number for them to look at. It's really helpful for them to understand that. And so oftentimes I know in our system, we'll ask for accountability reports or to look at your air. And captains might look at their own and say, hey, we're good. We got plenty of working time. If they can realize that their members of their team are consuming 30% more air than theirs, it just gives them a much better way of managing that. And it also, that trickles down to our command staff and everybody, and again, our work rest cycles, our need for crews, layering crews, and all the organizational things that come with that. So we thought that was really important. It reinforced our previous numbers, but added a little bit more context to that. One of the things that we looked at in this is transiency. I don't know for those departments out there, man, we've got a ton of transiency in our department. Sometimes more than 40% of our members in the field are either moved up in positions, working overtime, working shift trades, those kind of things. And we wanted to measure what happens when you've got multiple members that don't permanently belong to those crews. That was important to us. And what came out of it was actually disheartening at first because Aaron and I for hours combed this saying, there's got to be something here. There's got to be something different. And we couldn't find one statistically significant difference. And so I was like, how does this, but I think what in our organization, what we came to was, we must be training our folks well. The consistency across the board. If we could have 3 or 4 members on any unit, jump into a truck, go to a drill like this and perform the same as drills as crews that are all intact, it speaks something to the way that we're training and delivering this training, capturing all of our members and building consistency. So that was really helpful for us. Another thing that I think positives that we took away from this is that when it was a marker that we found, we have in our system called rescues. They're 2-member crews. They essentially are an ambulance, but they're firefighters on that. So they can be added to crews. They can be used as worker bees on these things. They're usually younger firefighters. And what we found is that if we can get more crews, especially those rescue crews attached to that first in hand line, what we found consistently through this, if you read the report, is that first in hand line is critical to this entire operation. And if you can get more members forward on that hose line, our numbers came that when we assigned those rescue members to that first in hose line with the engine crew, we were able to find and remove victims 36% faster than without those 2 extra members. That's all it was. And so being able to front load that, again, organizationally, that helps us in deployment models, that helps us know how and when to move crews and where the most important place to put them is. And so these are some of the positives that we can get away to some of the challenges if you want to in a minute, but those are just a few of the positives that we found in this to help reinforce our organizational decisions and hopefully make it a little safer for our members out there.
Yeah, and I'd add on to what Jason was saying is I think what we found is we're doing pretty good. Our crews overall performed well. We haven't had this department-wide training, so there's a little inconsistency on how they went about doing things. So bringing the crews together, giving them those foundational skills that they already had and kind of honing them into different techniques. I think we improved our communication amongst our crews interior when they are finding victims, how they're packaging different alternatives to removing them from a structure, whether that's out a window, out a back door, isolating them from the fire, or having to take them back through the fire area. I think we gave them a lot more tools with that, but overall, I thought our crews performed well on the drill.
Aaron, what do you think, man? Anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, Jason said that we had gone into this thinking there was probably going to be something in there as far as transiency. He used the word transiency, but just, the number of members that are kind of moving around on trucks. So to be clear on that, we actually went to every truck before they went into the drill, before we started the drill, and went member by member. Is this your official spot, or are you in some other capacity today? Like he said, working overtime, shift trade, roving through, et cetera. And so we knew going into that drill how many members what crews were intact and how many members were there. And we kind of had this idea that something was going to change. And that we ended up finding that it didn't. And we were looking for data that we thought was going to be there and wasn't there. And I just wanted to mention that, Jason and I did everything we could to make sure that we weren't going into things with preconceived ideas. And that if we did have preconceived ideas, that we let the data do the talking and that we didn't make the data show what we had expected was going to happen. And that was one of those moments where we said, well, we just can't find anything. I guess we can just kind of brush that to the side, and then had a further conversation to say, hey, well, maybe the fact that it's not telling us something is actually saying something about the way we're training. So, but yeah, we did the best we could to make sure that the data was the thing that was telling us something, not us telling what we wanted the data to say, if that makes sense.
That's remarkable. My hunch I feel like my gut would be the same thing. Like, these companies are going to perform worse because they're not used to working together. That's what you would expect. But and that's a great point to make, that if the data doesn't say something, that's saying something also. Right. That's a
Yeah, and I think it speaks exactly to why we do this, is because it challenges our assumption with stuff. Data is not emotional. It doesn't care about your SOPs. It doesn't care about, all it does is it gives you feedback on things. And I'll tell you, I get most excited when my assumptions get proven wrong. I love that, because it means there's growth in that. That's where we have opportunities to change the way we think, to change the way we operate, to have new conversations. And that's what the data can do for us. And every time we've measured a ton of things, not just these department-wide drills. It always seems like and I've been doing this for about 3 decades. And it's awesome when after all that time, your assumptions can get challenged and you say, hey, I was wrong. Let's start moving in. Let's figure out what this means in our organization, and let's change things to make the department better, to make it safer, to make it better for our customers, to, survivability of our victims, those kind of things. So that they're very exciting when you find those things. And so anyway.
And I would love to see, I'm sure probably somebody's done it, some fire department with less staffing, right? One with maybe a 3-person company, something like maybe even 2. I would love to see a comparison of the air consumption related to the officers, right? So, I know some of the guys and gals listening to this are thinking, yeah, I wish we could do that. I'm the captain or the lieutenant on the rig, and I'm also shucking hose and popping doors. It's the staffing is just not there, right? So I would love to see, some sort of comparison that we could articulate that helps us at budget time. When we can go, look at this, we need more staffing for these reasons, because we can't even, we've got people that can't do their job. So, because they just don't have the time, they got too busy. So that's a very interesting thing. And then the EMS roles, that's another note I wrote down while you guys were rolling, was the fire department I was with before I retired. We had a similar situation where we had our ambulances carried firefighting equipment, right? And the medics on there were also firefighters. So that's a great ace to have up your sleeve when you're getting an early arrival. I would be curious to see, are you replacing that unit when that ambulance crew engages in firefighting operations? Are they automatically replaced in the dispatch lineup, or how do you do that?
Maki,
so not necessarily. So generally on our typical house fire dispatch, it's a 3-in-1 dispatch. We get 3 engines of rescue, a ladder, and a couple battalion chiefs. So normally there's only one rescue on it, unless the incident commander will ask for more. But what we found when we were developing this drill and kind of looking at our practices, what would be best for the public and the firefighters, is we were trying to have a declaration of a working fire, automatically dispatch another rescue to kind of replace that one if they were pulled in. But what we found on real incidents before this drill and since this drill is anybody on scene can drive that rescue, and we have paramedics on every apparatus in the system. So if we're bringing out a victim, we're transferring care to usually an on-deck crew that's there, and anybody can use that apparatus and drive that rescue. It doesn't have to be the two that are assigned to it as they're coming out to take their turnout gear off, get in the rescue, bring it forward. So we're treating the apparatus as a piece of equipment that any of our firefighters on scene can use. And ideally, we would have somebody that's not been committed into the hot zone take that position over and use that rescue and drive it and take over patient treatment. And that way we can make sure that our guys that are involved in the firefight can still go through decon, take care of themselves and everything like that.
Outstanding. That's great. Yeah. I like to say, address the alligator closest to you, so if you've got people that need to be rescued, let's do that, and then we'll sort out the other things as we get to it. But no, it's a very heads up move. That's great. I love it that's what you're doing there with that you just can't fight. Fighting fire takes staffing, we'll have to keep yelling out in the boardroom till we get it, but that's what it
But
takes.
I will say too, as far as that goes, that was actually an important training point that I think came out of this, is that, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but when I got on, that was kind of the standard way of doing it is, if you're a rescue and you get assigned even into the hot zone, they need you, you're coming back out and you're to getting your gear off as quick as you can, and you're getting to work on EMS. And that was even a training point that I think a lot of our crews took out of this, was to kind of grasp, we've talked about it, but they actually had an opportunity to put that into practice, and, on this drill, to say, hey, my crew's inside, and let's just assign somebody else to that and use that, like he said, as a piece of equipment. So I think it came out as a good training point from this, that we got to actually use that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of add on to that, is as we were developing this drill and how we wanted to kind of tweak some of our SOPs and how we do things, one of them is, I think historically, when one of our crews would pull a victim out, they would be committed to patient care. So they would be shedding their turnouts in the yard, starting treatment. They didn't want to let go of that patient. And what we're finding is, one, it's better for the patient if we can transfer them out to an on-deck crew that can take that over. Again, for all the reasons they haven't been exposed and everything else, they're in a better position. But also, it's better for that initial crew, if they have air and they're physically capable, to go back in and complete that search, because they know what's been searched. They can be more thorough, make sure that nothing is missed. So getting that data that first in crew having a rescue attached made such a difference. I think that really validates that best practice for us moving forward.
Yeah, that's probably the master class of this little episode here, that to really leverage those EMS resources like that when you have them. And that's very heads up. It's easy to have the mindset that I came on the ambulance, I'm going to stand here with my EMS hat on today. And, it's good that you get some practice we're playing fluid here, y'all. I might have came on the ambulance. I might be with a nozzle here in a short second. Just depends on what happens. So I think anybody would take the nozzle if they could. So, that's how it goes. But
well, and
what were some of the chat? Well, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say that's another thing that's really when you're in the mindset of collecting data and information, when you're looking at analyzing training like we're doing here, you realize that it almost feels like there's more room for suggestions, for change, for movement as you're moving through. We're a large organization, and no doubt there's a lot of people spread out in the 550 square miles or whatever that is the city of Phoenix that might have different ideas about how they want to do things. And so to get everybody on the same page, and then also to introduce new ideas into the system like this, where we say, hey, I think this might work, but I'm not sure. Well, this is a perfect opportunity for crews to try it, for us to measure it, and then give feedback for these things. And I think what we universally found, because there were a lot of new things that came out in this training, the new techniques, there were a lot of people that were doing targeted searches and moving people out of windows, but we haven't ever systematically and consistently trained on that across the department. And so introducing some of these with consistent skills, showing techniques very consistently on how to do this, and teaching the why behind that, what we saw in almost every instance is that our members actually applied those skills in the training, and they were successful. They were, for instance, moving people out of windows, isolating rooms and moving people out of windows instead of historically, we've just drug people back out the way you came. It just makes sense. It's what you're thinking about. But our folks were doing it more often than not. They isolated a room, moved victims out a window, and we found that they were about 20% faster in doing that. So now we're increasing survivability, coming up with better techniques, safer techniques for our members, for the victims, getting people out quicker. And that's a new skill. Those are new things. And so in all of this, we're finding new techniques along the way. We're introducing new things, testing them to see if they work, and then looking at it on the outcome and saying, it was a success, or let's keep fine-tuning this thing until we get it right.
And that's another one, too, where the data told us something we maybe didn't even expect, where we were going into it going, hey, these are new skills. Nobody's going to do that. We don't do that. That's not a regular thing for us. We've always done it the old way. And then we started looking at the data, and it shows, our guys are really applying the stuff that we learned, like Maki said, in the classroom and in the hands-on portion before it. And so the data told us something, again, that we maybe didn't even expect. And it was good to see.
Outstanding.
Yeah, and to kind of add onto that, just since this drill finished back in February, we've had multiple incidents where our crews are pulling the public out of house fires, and a lot of times we're getting the feedback from them that, hey, it was just like the training that we did. I was thinking about the training, whether it's when they're making entry, doing that interior size up, finding somebody right near the door, or isolating in a bedroom. We had one just a few days ago where they had a woman in a wheelchair that was trapped kind of in an Arizona room, which is kind of a detached sunroom and closed off a house, kitchen fire that was rolling. The only way they couldn't bring her back out through that fire. So, hey, they made the decision, we're going to isolate her right here. We're going to knock the fire down. We're going to get more help around the back of the house so we can get her out that way. So they're really applying the training that we did. And it's good to see. It's nice.
The research and is finally making it to the field. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Were there any hard lessons, any things that surprised you guys? Like, we didn't see that coming in the drill.
For sure. Yeah. And that's, we love the transparency of that. And those are really the places that some people don't like that we had challenges or their things weren't done perfectly, but I love that because that's visibility. That allows us to know where to move. And so a couple things that we found relative to finding victims. So Maki mentioned in the buildup of this, we had a victim posted behind a door. And what we found was more often than not, our crews missed that victim on entry. There was a table there. There was some clutter. There was smoke on this down to the ground. There was zero visibility. And our members were missing that victim. And in fact, here's what was even more dramatic is what we found in the numbers was when the crews missed that victim on initial entry, or when they actually found the victim on initial entry, the average time to find that victim was 19 seconds. If they missed that victim initially, that victim wasn't found on an average until 3 minutes and 54 seconds into this incident. That's the difference between survivable and not survivable. And in many instances, that victim was feet from the door. And so there was a huge point of visibility for us to say, look, most of our crews are actually missing this victim right here. We need to train to that. And we had addressed it, but we need to now know that we got to train to this a little bit harder. Here's another piece that's connected to that or related, but very unique. We had two scenarios where there were two victims in the same room. One, they were on the same bed. Another one, there was an infant in like a cradle and an adult victim on the floor. And when our members went in and found one victim, oftentimes, and you can imagine this for those of you firefighters, it doesn't happen very often. You find a victim. This is a pretty high stress, high risk, low frequency type of event. They would pause the event and say victim, 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 and start moving that victim out and not clear the rest of the room. And so in a similar instance, when there was two victims in a room, we were finding one, getting them out. But if that second victim was found right away, they were found on average 11 seconds from the first victim. If they missed clearing that room, that second victim wasn't found until almost 2 minutes later. Again, survivable versus non-survivable. So those were two glaring pieces of information that we found that, again, we're getting ready, and we'll talk about this. We're getting ready to repeat a similar drill, sort of with a lot of new added components to it. But we've been able to sit people down in our classroom portion of this and direct them to that. Let them know the data, help them understand that most people miss that. We can't, and we're closing the gap on it. You talk about the consistency and narrowing that spread on that. We're pushing really hard in our training on this. We're going to measure it again, and we're anticipating that we're going to get a lot lower numbers on that. And so having that visibility is really important to us. And again, closing the gap on that is going to dramatically increase our survivability, our customer service, the ability for our crews to have a system and systematically search rooms. And so we're excited about that moving forward.
Amazing. I love it, man. This is what in-service training is all about,
Yep.
is getting hands-on, getting some data and making it better. That's fantastic. Let's get our nerd hats out for a minute. and because I'm hopeful that fire departments that are listening to this can take some of not only the tactical lessons that you've picked up and shared, but also how did you collect the data? Like what did you use? How did you ensure consistency in data collection? And what did that look like? Share with us a little bit about the back end stuff that went into this drill, so we can hopefully some other folks can take that and apply it. Who's the lead nerd?
Aaron, you want to jump on that?
Yeah. I'll take that. I'll take my best crack at it, and then Jason can make it sound pretty. How about that?
Nerd.
Yeah. So again, I came into this drill was already kind of designed, and as far as data collection, there's a lot of ways that you can do this stuff. You can do this stuff on pencil and paper and stopwatches and those kind of things. And what we had discussed on the front end of this was how are we going to get this stuff to be the most consistent that we possibly can. And so like most big municipalities, we don't always get to select, as you can imagine, the technology that's available to us at our fingertips within the system that we play in. So the sandbox that we play in happens to be the Microsoft suite of tools that the city of Phoenix uses citywide. And so even within that, there's a lot of different ways you can do things. You can type things in, you can put them in through Excel type things where you can then do calculations and stuff like that out of them. Jason had already had some experience last year when they did the first big drill, the big box drill, and had done a little more limited amount of data collection. They didn't collect near as many things, but they had already kind of dabbled in this a little bit. So he was kind of aware of some of the tools, and we decided to kind of explore that a little deeper. So what we actually ended up with was we ended up writing an app in Microsoft Power Apps. And all that allowed us to do was to collect things consistently. So we were able to take that tool, decide ahead of time exactly what the things are that we wanted to have, and make a consistent way to grab onto those. So for instance, if it was going to be an air, so we're going to measure your air before and after before you go into the drill, and when you come out, those are drop downs. We're going to make those every 100 pounds. And all the data collector has to do is walk out to that guy's truck, look at his bottle, select the drop down, put in a number, and he can move on. Other things like if the crew was intact or not, those were going to be check boxes. That's the easiest way for us to quickly grab onto that data. And then when it came to times, we're going to start timing things out. We're going to time when they hit the air brake, Then we're going to time how long does it take them to pull their hose? When do they touch the force entry pop? When are they done forcing entry? When do they hit the front door? Those we all want to be timestamped. So built into that program was a timer, and every one of those had a buttons created for it. So there's a button that says air brake on it. I'm the data collector. As soon as I hear that air brake, I hit that button, it timestamps. So that's how we got those timestamps. And then some of our more challenging pieces, as far as building the app out and how are we going to get these, were when do we find victims? So what we ended up doing for that was we ended up putting a radio on a separate frequency or a separate channel in the pockets of our instructors that were following crews through the interior of the structure. So those guys are walking through the structure, they find a victim, they yell out victim, victim, victim. That instructor would then jump on the radio and go, hey, victim number 1's been found. And we could hit that timestamp, because with the building being smoked up and all those kind of things, they weren't going to be able to carry an iPad around and push buttons on it. So we had to communicate some of those things over the radio. Sometimes those things became challenging for us. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about what the challenges are with that. But that's how we got all those timestamps. And then from that Power App, we had good data connectivity, and we were able to then dump those into a SharePoint database. And the SharePoint database had all of those timestamps, all of those checkboxes, all the yes, nos that we wanted to collect for that. I think we ended up saying that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 different data points for every evolution. So every evolution that got run, we're collecting about 45 different things. That's times, that's checkboxes, that's crew data, that's air consumption, all those kind of things. It dumps into a SharePoint database. And then from there, that's where we're able to kind of play around with how we manage that data. Right. So we ended up with so many thousand data points out of that. And then if I wanted to, that's where Jason and I started spending a bunch of time where we could figure out what we wanted to do with it. So if I wanted something simple, like a percentage of something that happened, I might only need one column of data, and I can dump that into an Excel file, do a summation at the bottom, and do a little calculation, and I got a percentage. Some of the other things were way more difficult, where we're trying to compare, the percentage that went out the window versus went out the door, the percentages that comparing different data against other data and getting things out of it is a little more complicated. So for the simple stuff, we would use something like Excel. For the stuff that was a little more complicated, we dumped it into Power Business Intelligence, or Power BI.
Power BI.
And Power BI allows you to do a lot more with it. And that's where some of the more complicated calculations came out of, was Power BI. But I mean, there's so many different tools that you could use out there. And you were talking about smaller departments and how do you do this and how do you make that work? Those are really good questions and really good discussions. I think the important thing for us was that we had to figure out ways to collect stuff that was going to be consistent. And I talked about that early on the front end of this thing is, if you're not doing it consistently and then your times are kind of all over the map, it's very difficult to tell whether that, Jason's talking about narrowing that gap, getting that standard deviation down, making sure that things are our averages are getting more narrow. We don't know if those averages are really, if the ones on the end of the bell curve are really high and low because of the way we took the data, or if they were actually performed that way. So creating that app just seemed like to us the easiest way to grab onto things without, again, no pencil and paper, no stopwatches and having to type things in. And you think that I also got to go out and kind of put the team together to collect the data. And then there were days that I actually spent, punching those buttons myself. And early on, it was maybe a little bit of a disagreement that Jason and I had as far as how much data are we going to collect. And, I was going into this thing saying, let's collect as much as we possibly can. It's going to give us the most ability to pull things out of it. Even if we don't use it, at least we have it, kind of a thing. And I tell you what, collect 50 data points within 8 minutes of a drill. And it's a lot, even for our data collectors to be able to, my point being, even making it easy and where everything's at one push button for them to take something is still a lot to gather and to pay attention to and to do correctly and to do with consistency. It took a lot more effort than even I thought that it was going to take, even with a simple tool in your hand. So I don't know if you got anything to add to that, Jason.
Yeah, I'll jump in, just kind of fill in the gaps. And I think the big takeaway there, if you're hearing for departments, depending on your size, is I would start off smaller rather than larger.
For sure.
Because the more data you try to collect, the more likelihood that you're going to have errors and that there's going to be unclean, we call it not clean data. And so if you can capture just a few points to begin with and start there, it gives you it helps you with the understanding of what it takes to process data. And then it also increases the likelihood that you're going to be more consistent with that. I will say too, just understanding the logistics that went into specifically the data collection portion. We're thankful that after the last report that we put out that we ended up talking about last year, Eddie, our department saw the incredible value in this data. And so what they did is they allowed us to invest in a robust team. So we had, it was pretty complicated. We had cameras posted outside windows with, screens on the inside of a pod that our folks were looking at. So we knew exactly when people were coming out of doors and windows. We had multiple facilitators just dedicated to data collection every single day for each of these. Again, we had apps that were built. We did use Power Apps. And one of the other things we did is for those, this is Nerd 2.0, for those that are out there that are interested in this, we use Power Automate, which actually allows you to take that data and move it places in some weird ways. It used blocking and some other terms that Aaron could share with you, but it allows you to actually move that data. So we had that data actually, once we submitted it through Power Apps, Power Automate was taking it and moving it into business intelligence for us and organizing that for us so that we were able to just kind of show up and start dissecting that. So for those out there that want a more robust system, those are the things we use: Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Business Intelligence. And then once you get into business intelligence, there's some really complicated tools. But it took a lot of facilitators. It took dedicated personnel. It took certain equipment, offline radios, a lot of that stuff. And we felt that based on what we had, we could capture the amount of information we had. We wouldn't even think about capturing that much information if we didn't have dedicated resources like that. So I think it's important to collect data to the point that not outside of the realm of what you have the capacity or the resources to do. And you're going to find a lot more value in less information that's collected correctly than you will in a lot of information that's messy.
Yeah, and I'll circle back on a couple of those things. You talked about starting small. That absolutely is important. If you don't have dedicated resources, or you have a smaller group of people that's going to be doing this for you, the smaller amount of data is probably going to be better. And that you kind of get into a little bit of a philosophical discussion, I guess, on that in terms of what you want to get. Would I rather have half the data and have it be twice as accurate, or would I rather have twice as much data, but I'm not sure what's good and what's not because I kind of took on too much? So just certainly something to think about. And another thing is, this was our second round of doing this way. We're going to be doing it again here coming up. And I think our people are starting to learn that we're doing it. And so there's an element of this too that is actually helpful when your crews and your trainers and everybody that's involved knows that you're doing data collection, because they can help you grab onto certain things. So when we're in a fast moving kind of a day and we're trying to get all these evolutions done in a certain amount of time and get crews back in service, things tend to happen pretty quickly. And so you find that you miss things because, I needed to get everybody's air readings after the drill. Well, they already went and filled their bottle because they're on getting ready for the next drill. And so now I just missed data. But having your crews know, hey, we're going to need your air bottle readings when you come out of the building. They walk right by your data collector. They're kind of almost helping feed you data. So I think that's another thing that could help if you're working on a smaller budget, you don't have as many people helping you out, is letting your crews know. And we did at the beginning of every day and the beginning of every new group that came down, hey, we're going to be getting this, we're going to be getting that. So they kind of knew what to expect. And I think that was also a big help, and could be a big help if you didn't have maybe as many resources to help you collect data. Is make sure your people know you're collecting it, and they can actually help feed you some of that.
And I'll go one step beyond that, Aaron. Thanks for bringing that up. Is that our mindset in collecting data has always been member centric. What can we collect to help them do their job better, safer, more effectively, more efficiently? And so when we're thinking about the data we collect, that's always in the forefront of our mind. And so I think because of that, we've been able to publish back immediately, and we're very transparent in the information we push back. But we push it back to our members in a way that gives them really tangible information to manage scenes better, to make better decisions, to make safer decisions. And I think because of that, we've gotten buy-in. Our members see the value in what we're doing because it positively benefits them. It allows them to make better decisions. And so because of that, you get the buy-in. So they're more apt to help you collect the data and be willing to jump into that. I think I've talked to some departments where people can get kind of resistant to those things. And so I would also suggest just making sure keeping a member-centric and customer-centric perspective on this. Collect data first that allows your members to do their job better, safer, more effectively, instead of just to kind of put a report together and bolster some administrative deal. I think you'll get a ton of buy-in, and that's where we see the value in this. So
you made me think of a interesting perspective. I'm not used to it because I'm not from a department like that. But was there any punitive aspects? Let's say a company performs just miserably. Are there any punitive repercussions from this? How did you address something as delicate as that?
Absolutely. We did have some companies and some crews that underperformed of what the expectations are for any first line company. And I think the most beneficial piece we had in place for that is we had buy-in and involvement from all the battalion chiefs. So if we had a battalion chief or a crew from their battalion that was there and they weren't performing well, they had the opportunity to come off drill times with their crews to practice evolutions, do things like that. And we actually had a few crews that came down multiple times just to get the evolution, to get the reps, and to get better. So we did address those crews. Fortunately, there weren't a whole lot that were underperforming that much that they needed to continue to train. But we had the buy-in from the battalion chiefs, and we would just refer it to them, and they would take care of their crews that needed some help.
But, no one was harmed, right? It was never punitive.
No.
It was let's make you better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of that is to the only way I could see I would get maybe a little squirrely with somebody is if their attitude was such that they didn't want to participate. That's a different conversation. But as far as, just trying to make the department better to serve the community, I think that's really got to be embedded in it. So, I always hear about these chiefs. I don't know any personally, but, that would be my strong message to those guys is, hey, man, this is to make the department better, not to be getting paper out. It's a different thing. So that's a big focus.
Absolutely. And yeah, the goal is to identify where we need to work on as a department as a whole and the individuals. So to bring those crews back in that needed a little extra help was beneficial. It was definitely good, but yeah, nothing punitive, just identifying and getting better.
Well, I would say with that too, in the data, that was another thing our data provided for us was that it spoke to the reinforcement of the training in this drill. Obviously, this was rolled out over about a 2.5, 3 month period of time. And so crews in the field start getting winds of what the drill's about. And even though we had multiple scenarios that we would mix up and sometimes throw in no victims just to make sure, keep everybody honest, people are starting to understand there's a forced entry element, and there's a search element, and there's, the layout. And so they would be coming down on nights and weekends. We know because it was down at our special ops site, and the guys were calling us saying, hey, people are breaking into this building and they're messing up the prop. And those are crews coming down because they know they're due in a couple of weeks for this drill. And what we found was, you can speak to whether, that's right or wrong, good or bad. But what we loved about it is we looked at virtually every proficiency metric at the end of this. And it's in the report as well. I think we looked at we reported 12 or 15 different metrics. And we looked at what the first quarter proficiency was versus the fourth quarter of this training. And in every metric, we couldn't find one that didn't get significantly better over the course of that time. And so, again, what it did is for us, I don't care if people are breaking into the place on weekends to train. That organizationally is a fantastic thing to manage and to deal with. And it showed that our members were getting more proficient and more consistent. I don't think we published the standard deviation, but that was consistent as well. And so we were happy that they were doing that. And to Maki's point, not making it punitive, but offering more training and bringing those members down multiple times to continue the frequency of this in every instance brought their proficiency up, their consistency got closer, and they were blending in just with every other crew. So we felt like that was a huge success for us.
Now we'll just call it recon. You know,
yeah. Right.
Go recon that operation, see what's going on.
Yeah, and as you'd expect, we had crews that came down, and this drill was like getting out of bed in the morning. It was no problem for them. They had no issues whatsoever, forcing entry, pulling their lines, finding victims, clearing the house. So we had both sides of the spectrum, and we're just trying to bring everybody up to that higher level.
Close the gap.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Close the gap.
So I think the message I would send to departments that may not have the resources, at least readily available that they know of, be sure, the applications that you guys are talking about are kind of baked into the Microsoft 365 thing. It's a strong chance your municipality probably has some sort of licensing for that. You might have to talk to the IT department or go find out, go find somebody and then figure out how to use it. You can, I learn a lot from just YouTube videos if I have to, how can I set up this thing to work, or is there a class I can take or somebody in our technology department I can talk to? Lots of options to figure out how to leverage those tools. I think more fire departments have it than they think.
I agree.
Have access to that stuff. Yeah. So
something else.
I think you guys didn't know you had it until you went looking, right?
No, exactly. And that was where and to other departments out there too, we started using like Microsoft Forms, which is a very basic, and I would imagine most every department out there probably has access to that. It's a very simple tool, but it actually has embedded in it its own graphing and its own sort of very basic but analytics tool in there. You can pull those reports as databases and move them over into something like Excel. And so even to begin by looking at a couple programs, like get to know Excel a little bit better, and how you can take a spreadsheet and very easily just highlight it and make a graph out of it. And you can start building some charts just within Excel. But Forms was another tool. And I would challenge some of those members out there that maybe they don't have all those resources and they're looking for a place to start. That's a great tool because it's an app that you can use that's already pre-built with templates that you can create what you want to capture, and it'll capture some of that data for you. So yeah, there's definitely some of those tools and we didn't know about Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate until we started digging into the product. And I think it was Seth back when we were working a couple years ago. He found this product and he says, we have access to it. And it just opened the door for some things. So yeah.
And I will say that the large majority of the stuff that we collected, you literally could use just about any app. You could use just about any way to collect that. You could do it with pen and paper if you want to. Where it really gets challenging and where you're really going to have to, if you want that kind of data, where you're really going to have to put some effort in to get it correctly is when you're going to start doing some timing. Because once you get into those timing functions, unless you have something that's automated and you have, which we've, at least thought about and haven't advanced down that road really at all. But, you could do automated things where you have sensors on doorways and all those kind of things. But without going to those levels, pen and paper writing things off a stopwatch is going to be really, really difficult. But all of the other data in terms of the yes, no type things or air readings and those kind of things, that can all be done just about through any kind of data collection method. And Microsoft Excel, which I would imagine almost everybody has access to, will give you just about anything kind of calculation you really want to do out of that. It's really when you get into the timing type of things that in order to get some kind of level of consistency, you're really going to have to work on getting some tools in place for that.
Awesome. That's great advice. I really appreciate you guys sharing all that. And again, the Phoenix Fire Department kind of leading the way with the size, scope, and ingenuity that you guys have. My appreciation to every man and woman there, and Chief Duran and everybody, the whole team. I appreciate everything you guys have been doing. It's really been beneficial to the fire service for a long time now. We've been, you guys have been out there doing that. So really, really do appreciate it. Any parting thoughts before we let folks go on.
I'd like to just mention that what we're doing moving forward now is we're taking the data and everything that we learned from this last drill, and we just began the next phase of our crew development. So this started again with the classroom portion. It'll move to hands-on, and we're going to have another drill. But this classroom portion, we're taking the after-action report, the data we learned, we're presenting it to all our members, marrying that up with the UL FSRI data that matches up, and moving forward. And this is going to culminate in another 3-in-1 drill. We're going to use our B building down at the academy. It's a 2-story apartment style building with the fire props. We're going to smoke it out. We're going to see how much better we've gotten since the last drill, and just continue to reinforce the lessons learned and get better and better. So it's a great tool to have to build all the data that these guys created and collected and organized, to be able to look at that and go, okay, let's focus on this for this next drill moving forward, and we'll just continue to move forward and get better.
Data-informed training operations.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to add one more thing, it would just be for anybody who is going to look at this report at all. We did our absolute best, like I said, to make sure that the data said what the data said, and that we weren't putting any kind of spin on anything. Jason and I would sit here and wordsmith the same 3 sentences over and over and over again, trying to say what the data was saying without putting any kind of we should do this or we shouldn't do that, or we really tried to be very objective about it, because the whole point is to make everybody better. If this helps any other departments across the country, that's a benefit for all of us in the service. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that when you look at this, I'd throw the challenge down to you to find something that doesn't look like it's clear and clean and it's from the data. And anything that we couldn't really let the data say, we threw it out. We had a lot of data that we had to throw out because we looked at things and said, man, we cannot tell why this time is so high, or we cannot tell why this time is so low, or we can't tell why this day it was so inconsistent, or whatever it is. And so we threw out anything that wasn't clear. And so we did our best to make sure that any data that people are going to pull, if you're going to pull data from this and you're going to use it to train to or do something with it, you can be pretty confident that it's going to be, that it's saying what the data actually said, and not something that we're trying to make somebody do or think. So that's just my spin.
Very good.
And the only thing I would add is I hope that other departments can benefit from this work. One of the things that would warm my heart is if it would challenge other departments to start measuring some things, give them ideas of how they can measure stuff. I read a book by Douglas Hubbard called How to Measure Anything. I'm not a rep. I would say go check it out, because it's a really interesting book that'll challenge some ideas on how you can actually start capturing and looking into things that you're interested in finding out about. But also, use our report. There is a pretty good cross-section of people. There was well over 1,000 people, over 24 days, 200 and some evolutions. And so I think it's a good starting point for many departments across the nation to say, hey, maybe this is in the ballpark of what it would take for us to do that too. And eliminate a lot of time and effort that it might take to get to that point. Now you can start challenging those ideas, but we really hope that this wasn't just an internal piece. We share this regionally with our folks. We have a consortium of about 30 different departments that we work with on an auto aid system. And we're hoping that people don't have to duplicate this. We want this resource to help departments out there get a starting point, a launching point to some conversations, to maybe change the way they do things, and to give them some ideas on some things that they can measure beyond what we've done. And so we really hope it's a benefit. Anybody that hears this and wants to reach out, call Maki anytime after business hours, or myself during business hours, or Aaron, and we're happy to help you. But we just hope that this helps the greater fire service. This wasn't built just for the Phoenix Fire Department. So,
well, I really appreciate you guys coming on the show and coming back again for the second appearance to follow up from the previous in-service show. Go back and check that one out too. That was in September of 23 that aired. So you can go back and look at that. You look at this, and certainly we'll do our best to make sure you have access to the report in the show notes. And once again, guys, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show. I really do appreciate it. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Fire Service Data and Tech Talk. My name is Eddie Buchanan. You can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the places, Facebook. We have a Facebook page for Fire Service Data and Tech Talk. We have a Twitter handle, which is Data Tech Talk. And of course, I'm always over on LinkedIn. So love to hear ideas you have for the show and feedback on what you heard here today. So hope everybody has a good month, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Stay safe.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, those toxins lead to cancer. Protect yourself with Magnegrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes. To get free grant assistance, visit Magnegrip.com.
Attention first responders, ready for a new challenge? You can turn your leadership skills into deliciousness by becoming a Firehouse Subs restaurant owner. First responders will receive a $100,000 cash incentive to help open their restaurant. Continue serving after service. Visit firehousesubsfranchising.com today.